In this episode, let's continue to look at practicing perspective to understand opinions by using empathy as a tool. Hi, this is Dan Schuck at Glass Half Question. What's your perspective? Is that perspective an opinion? How do you know that that perspective is better or worse than another opinion? Do you ever struggle to understand someone else's opinion? Do you ever have to deal with opinions that seem to be very different than your own? This is all part of my Glass Half Question project, and also the theme of my children's book for grown-ups, A Glass Half Empty or Half Full, which you can find on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. In this Practicing Perspective video series, I'm talking about the concepts of balance and perspective, and more recently I've been talking about opinions and biases. This can be really helpful for how you find balance, happiness, and success in your life. Just to recap a few concepts from the past few episodes, we each form a sense of truth based on facts and perspectives. Our individual truth is both factual and perceptual. Some of those perspectives are almost invisible to us, and some of them we claim as our own opinions. If you haven't seen any of these videos, you might want to refer back to them either right here, or you can go to www.glasshalfquestion.com for the full catalog. In the last episodes, I've been describing how we compare opinions to learn things from one another. We do this by comparing the underlying facts, and also comparing the underlying, supporting, sometimes relative perspectives we each have. The facts part is mostly about making sure that we both agree on the facts and have all the basic information that both perspectives need for their context. And then we need to compare each other's supporting perspectives. This is almost certainly where the differences will exist, whether the opinion is about whether the coffee is too hot or too cold, or which political candidate to support. Of course, we all know that we have to look at things from another person's point of view, but to really know that and get it into your thinking and practices is another thing. And I want to double click on this part of practicing perspective. The thing we are talking about is empathy, and before I go too far, I should probably clear up a grammatical dictionary kind of question that comes up between the words empathy and sympathy. We sometimes use these two words interchangeably, and they're really not. Empathy is a basic building block and brain function that we are going to talk about and learn to use as part of the practicing perspective skills. Sympathy is more complex. Built on top of empathy, it adds emotional context and perspectives of compassion or pity. Often empathy leads to sympathy. Sympathy without any real empathy is called altruism, and we can talk about that some other time. We will of course continue to discuss sympathy and compassion as part of this journey, but the real simple raw power comes in the more elemental empathy tools. Empathy is an evolutionary brain function that we have to increase our mind's understanding of the world. This ability to compare our perspectives with others and learn from it is a fundamental survival skill built into all human beings, and even many higher intelligence animals. It's also not just one thing. Empathy has different parts to it. Daniel Goleman is the co-director of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organization at Rutgers University, and he explains empathy as being three things that work together in what he describes as the Empathy Triad. Cognitive empathy, the ability to understand another person's perspective; emotional empathy, the ability to feel what someone else feels; and empathetic concern, the ability to sense what another person needs from you. Now, I believe we often get these three things muddled together when we talk about empathy, and that it could be really useful to think about empathy as being these three different things. Often when we talk about empathy, the first thing we think of is empathetic concern, and we call someone empathetic or not. The term empath has become really popular in the last 25 years, I think largely because of science fiction television and movies, where this concept of really sharing emotions with another person is depicted as this kind of mystical art. But there's a lot of value to the three types of empathy as we go to use them in our practicing perspective techniques to evaluate each other's opinions. Cognitive empathy is kind of foundational to all of this. It sounds simple, but it actually engages the storytelling parts of our brain to be able to do this. In order to use basic cognitive empathy, we have to imagine the facts and supporting perspectives of the other person from their point of view. Here's a simple example. You may be regular sized and have no problem fitting under the doorway, but it is possible for you to imagine the perspective of a friend who is much taller and might bump his head on the door jamb. This is the kind of empathy we use all the time, but it's not always automatic. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves to do it. I'm sure we've all dealt with people who are really good at this, and other people who are not quite so good at this kind of empathy. This is even more true for emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is the thing where we not only imagine the situation from the other person's perspective, but also imagine how that would feel. So we might not only be able to imagine that our tall friend might hit his head on the door jamb, but also feel how painful that would be for our friend. This is part of our brain evolution as humans, springing forth from the ancient parts of the brain beneath the cortex. This allows us to feel fast without thinking deeply. In other words, our brains allow us to literally feel another person's pain. Our brain patterns can quickly adjust themselves to align with another person so that we can understand their perspectives and feelings. Have you ever winced when you saw someone else bump their head, or felt a thrill when you see someone else win the game? This is your brain's natural abilities of emotional empathy at work. For both the cognitive empathy component and the emotional empathy component, you can probably see how these are important for practicing perspective techniques. When we are looking at someone else's perspective or opinion, it is helpful to be aware of both these kinds of empathy and to use them with purpose. But what about this third kind of empathy, empathetic concern? This is the aspect of empathy that I believe we tend to think of first when we think of empathy. This is also biological and built right into our brains. Here's an experiment you can do to see this in action. Watch the room the next time someone brings a baby into the room. Watch where people's eyes go, and you'll see the mammalian brain center leap into action as empathetic concern comes to life. As important as empathetic concern is, we need to look at it a little bit differently when we consider the practicing perspective techniques. With cognitive empathy and emotional empathy, we want to ask ourselves what using these add to our understanding of another person's perspective. In other words, are we able to imagine the other person's perspective and even their feelings about that perspective? With empathetic concern, we need to look at our own feelings about the other person and their opinions and perspectives. How much are we projecting our own concern for the other person into our interpretation of their perspective? Does your empathetic concern somehow cloud your ability to really evaluate the other person's perspective fairly? Going back to the practicing perspective techniques, as you look at the underlying facts and supporting perspectives that make up the other person's opinion, it's useful to apply an empathy test to each point. 1, do you have cognitive empathy for what the other person might be seeing or experiencing? 2, do you have emotional empathy and can start to feel the feelings the person might have about the facts and perspectives that make up their opinion? And finally, do you have empathetic concern for the other person that may be affecting your ability to objectively look at any of their supporting facts and perspectives? Over the next few weeks, try to think about how you use empathy in your interactions with other people. Being more aware of the empathy triad and how the different phases of empathy each work can help you be more purposeful and effective in your communication and practicing perspective skills. In the next episodes, I'll continue to look at empathy and how we fit that as a tool into our practicing perspective toolkit. And we'll also talk more about how you maintain control over your empathy to find happiness and success in your communication. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful and kind of fun. And be sure to click on the subscribe button now to make sure you get the next videos in this series. My website is www.glasshalfquestion.com, and if you go there, you'll find the full catalog of these videos and the rest of my content. Leave me a comment here if you have any questions or related thoughts, and please share this video with anyone you know that you think would appreciate this, or perhaps someone you know that could use a little extra help with perspective. And finally, leave me your comments here with any questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts about empathy, and remember, keep practicing perspective.